After 8 long years, Civilization is finally back. Civ 7 marks a major turning point for the franchise, as the developers at Firaxis Games have made a variety of changes to the classic formula that we all know and loved. Fortunately, I had a little bit of early access to Civ 7, and I've already shamelessly poured over 100 hours into the game. So, in the spirit of the franchise, I'm here to pass my wealth of knowledge on to you to make sure you don't make the same mistakes that I did. And trust me, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, but that's okay because that's what Civ was built on. So, without further ado, I'm Joey with esports.gg, and let's get into 10 beginner tips so you can start off on the right foot in Civ 7. Now, I don't want to take away too much of your time from Civ 7, so I'll run through these tips fairly quickly, but still offer up enough details so you end this video with more knowledge than you came in with. To start things off, my first tip is to produce multiple scouts to completely uncover the initial map as quickly as possible. Scouts are the first thing you can produce when you establish a capital, they don't take too many turns to make, and they're used solely for uncovering tiles on the map around you. To make the most out of the scouts' abilities, make 2 or 3 of them and send them in different directions. This way, you can control them every turn and see exactly what your map has to offer. Every map in Civ 7 is randomized, so it's crucial to understand what your map looks like, what resources are nearby, and where you might want to start looking to settle new towns. The second tip I have for you is to turn on in-game tutorials and thoroughly read through the Civ 7 encyclopedia. While it might seem like homework instead of a video game, there are so many systems at play in Civ 7 that not knowing even one mechanic can mess you up for hours. With tutorials enabled, you'll get brief pop-ups every time you encounter a new mechanic. However, you can also view more of those tutorials by reading the encyclopedia, which you can bring up through the game's menu. This gives you much more information about everything going on in Civ 7. My third tip is to not get too caught up in the advisor recommendations. At the start of Civ 7, you'll get the choice to pick a special type of advisor. Your options are economic, military, scientific, and cultural. Once you pick an advisor, you can research technologies and civics and produce units and items that are specifically recommended by your advisor. However, you don't have to, nor do you want to, just choose things because your advisor recommends them. Pick whatever you think is the best option at the time, and use your advisor's recommendations if you don't know what to pick. For example, let's say the cultural advisor recommends that you research the mysticism civic. However, at the same time, you want to unlock the army commander through the discipline civic. You can always come back to the cultural advisor's recommendation, but if you want the army commander first, go with your gut. The fourth beginner tip for Civ 7 is to always start off on the right foot with other world leaders. While you can greet leaders with hostility in your second or third playthrough, you'll usually want to make your first playthrough as simple as possible so you can fully understand all the mechanics in Civ 7. By greeting leaders peacefully the first time you meet them, you can access their borders freely, establish more trade routes, and gain other resources like influence and gold. Now later on, if you want to get hostile with a leader, that's definitely okay and even encouraged, especially if you're eyeing one of their cities. But for the start, just begin things on the right foot. My fifth tip revolves around expansion. Specifically, it's in your best interest to start expanding your empire as quickly as possible. The simplest way to do this at the start of Civ 7 is to produce a settler, which might be called something different depending on what civilization you choose. The settler can travel to any spot on the map you've explored so far and set up a settlement. My advice is to create multiple settlers and start colonizing the majority of your continent. While other leaders will have settlements on the continent, if you dominate the majority of its lands, you control everything that happens on it. Down the line, this makes it easier to go to war with another leader, take over their settlements on your land, and completely colonize an entire continent. When you're picking the location for a new settlement, try to choose spots that have an abundance of resource tiles nearby. This will vastly improve your gold production later on and keep your happiness level stable across the board. And hey, speaking of happiness, you'll be happy to hear about our sponsor for today's video. Just kidding, we have no sponsor. But hey, maybe subscribe, it does help out. The sixth tip I have for you is to never stop producing military units. Whether you're making basic infantry units, commanders, or naval units, you always want to have some kind of combat production happening in your civilization. The more settlements you have, the easier it is to produce multiple units at the same time. Speaking of settlements, you want to have at least 1 or 2 military units at every settlement under your control. Ideally, having an army commander with a full force of troops at every settlement should be your end goal, but at the start of Civ 7, just try to have every settlement protected in some way. By doing this, you shore up defenses for whenever conflict with an enemy comes around. If your settlement is on the coast or connected to a river, having a naval unit in addition to land units is recommended so you can deal with anything the enemy throws at you. The seventh tip I have up my sleeve is to leave towns as towns for as long as possible. When you settle a new location, it will start out as a basic town. However, you have the chance to convert it into a city soon after it's established. Compared to cities, towns are smaller and can't produce items or units with turns, they can only use gold. While this sounds bad, towns can immediately produce things instead of having to wait multiple turns for them. You can also specialize towns to increase their yield on certain resources, which strengthens your capital. Even though you might want to immediately convert towns into cities, it's best to let them grow, produce everything you want out of them, and then make them into a city after that. My 8th tip is to utilize a new mechanic in Civ 7 called the Espionage Actions. These are special actions you can take against other leaders you've met on the map. As you progress in the game, you'll unlock more actions, and some leaders you can pick will have perks that grant them access to unique actions. However, the first couple of espionage actions are really all you need. These allow you to steal technology and government styles from other leaders, which can be hugely profitable if they're done repeatedly. There's a chance you get caught from these actions, but I was only ever caught once and it just made the leader unhappy with me, so it was a fair trade. The actions also cost a good bit of influence, but they're definitely worth it. Don't worry, we're almost done, as the 9th beginner tip I have for you is to not worry about the water during the first antiquity age. As you uncover more of your starting map with scouts, you'll eventually find water tiles that you can't go into. While I know it's tempting to want to go into the water and uncover more tiles, don't even sweat them right now. You won't be able to go into the open ocean tiles until the exploration age, which follows the antiquity age. For the first age, just worry about uncovering every land tile you can and then make your scouts rest until the next age. From there, you can cross into the ocean tiles and even produce actual naval ships to make it easier. To round things out, the 10th and final beginner tip for Civ 7 is to make sure you're keeping up with your legacy path. At the start of every age, you get to pick your advisor, and that will determine what legacy path you're set on. You can think of your legacy path as the main quest in Civ 7, as it directly affects the different objectives across all 4 legacies in every age. The more legacy path objectives you complete, the more progress you'll make on your chosen path. At the end of every age, your progress is compared to that of other leaders on the map, so naturally you want to try and beat them at everything you can. Even though Harriet Tubman is wielding a hand cannon, don't let her advance farther than you on the military legacy path. And that goes double for Napoleon, as that tried to take over the world from the second I met him. Eventually though, using the tips I just laid out, I was able to snatch some towns from the tiny and mighty Frenchman. And that does it for my 10 beginner tips on Civ 7. Hope you found at least one of them helpful in some way, no matter how many years you've been playing Civ. For more gaming videos, stay tuned right here to esports.gg.